Right now, the day's biggest news stories from a Vegas perspective. This is the Vegas Take with Sharp and Shapiro.
All right, welcome back. It is the Vegas Take, Sharp and Shapiro. Obviously, we will get back to this tragic, horrific situation involving Kobe Bryant losing his life and his 13-year-old daughter and 7 others in this helicopter crash. Former NBA player and UNLV Rebel Marcus Banks will be joining us in hour number 3. Jamison Walsh from Drive Time Sports to talk about the basketball impact. But let's get to, certainly, if not of this Kobe Bryant horrific story, this would be the top story going right now, and it is the Trump impeachment trial. And we are learning new information in regards to John Bolton and his upcoming book. He is claiming that Donald Trump told him to withhold aid for investigations into Democrats. Joining us on the line with us right now, this is a guy who knows a thing or two about impeachments. He is a former Clinton House impeachment manager and former congressman from Florida. Bill McCollum joining us right now on the line. Mr. McCollum, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm glad to be on the show this morning. I'm sorry about Kobe Bryant, as everybody else is, but I'm happy to join you on this topic.
I appreciate that. Yeah, tough day for everybody, no question about it. Mr. McCollum, let me start out by asking you this. The new information that just came out in the last 24 hours in regards to John Bolton, his new book coming out, claiming in the book that there was a quid pro quo, claiming in the book that he has the information directly from the president that aid was withheld to try to get investigations into Democrats. Is there any argument that he shouldn't be a witness? I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, there is an argument. I personally would like to see witnesses called. I've said that for some time. It'd be my personal preference. But let's go back a step back just a minute and look at the fact that the New York Times reported this from anonymous sources in the past. Often those anonymous sources have not proven to be accurate in some of the same type of articles pertaining to the president and this impeachment process and efforts earlier to do so. But having said that, let's assume that it's accurate. I think that it will give the impetus, which is the design here, and certainly what Mr. Schiff and other Democrats are using to have a couple of witnesses called to get the key Republicans sufficient numbers to vote for witnesses. It takes 4 of them. We've already heard today from Senator Romney and also from Senator Collins of Maine. I suspect that there are others. I don't know where Senator Murkowski will be or Senator Lamar Alexander or some of the others that are considered moderates in this process. But it has been my assumption all along that it would be a close vote, and I thought probably that there would be enough Republican votes to have witnesses, just a matter of who and what the structure will be.
Mm-hmm. And look, going back to the Clinton impeachment trial and everything else that took place there, you guys got down to the truth. And I certainly didn't have a problem with what you did. Let's be honest about it. Bill Clinton lied under oath. He did have sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky. He should have never lied about it. And if he didn't lie about it, he wouldn't have been impeached, even though he did embarrass the country in that situation. In this situation, it's a different type of embarrassment, allegedly, isn't it, Mr. McCollum? At least according to Chuck Schumer, who tweeted today, this New York Times report suggests multiple top Trump administration officials knew the facts and deliberately misled Congress and the American people. A massive White House cover-up. Would you agree with that?
No, I don't think we can make that big jump. First of all, there were no crimes committed here that I can see, and I still don't see them based on anything that might be revealed affirmatively with regard to the book information that's out there. There were literal crimes, I'm talking about statutory crimes, lawful crimes, committed, as you just described, in the Clinton case, involving, I think, 16 of them altogether, which we combined into 2 or 3 articles of impeachment. In the case of this particular trial, I think the key operative thing for people to remember, there are 2 or 3 of them. One is that I think 21 of my I'm a former attorney general as well as congressman.
Sure.
My former colleagues in the attorney general space wrote to the Senate last week. You right now have no actual crime, no corruption specific that would be alleged, but you do have the idea that the president had the state of mind that he intended to do certain things that were not really good. And if you take that to the logical conclusion in foreign policy, just about every president in the past 40 years or longer would probably be subject to impeachment. And going forward, it's a really horrible impression.
Yeah.
So my conclusion of this is there's no actual high crime and misdemeanor in this instance. And while you could say it's an abuse of power, that's a pretty subjective term. So let's assume all the facts are correct. I don't assume that, but I'm going to do it for the purpose of this point. All the facts that have been alleged by the Democrats in the House managers and whatever's in the Bolton book are there. That just ratifies what they've been saying. There's still not some reason, something that I would remove the president for that rises to that level. Because this, if you go to the other side of it, you're going to hear it today from the defense, I'm sure. The goods, the weapons, the military aid got to Ukraine in just as timely a fashion as would have happened if he had released it at the beginning, according to the witnesses in the actual hearings I sat and listened to myself that Congressman Schiff held. I think that you also have a situation in which the president had provided aid that President Obama had not. So from saying that this, and they are saying this, that this is some kind of major political fiasco abroad in terms of the outcome that put us at risk in some way to the Russians or whatever, is just exaggerating and blowing it all out of proportion. So you ask at the beginning, is there an argument not to have witnesses? Well, I would conclude if I were a senator today that I would already know, unless there's something I don't expect and don't hear from in this book so far that comes forward, I already know enough and would have my mind made up to vote for acquittal in this particular matter. And I wouldn't need witnesses, but...
Well, can I interject?
I think it's fair. But I think it's fair to bring witnesses. We had witnesses in the other case, and I've always thought that was the preferable thing to do because most people aren't paying the kind of attention that I am, or maybe you are.
I get it, Mr. McCollum, and obviously I respect your opinion and your experience, but I have to ask you this. This is where I think we would disagree. You have John Bolton, a lifelong Republican. Many Republicans love this man. You're telling me if he gets up there on the stand under oath, and he says that there was a quid pro quo, the president looked him in the eye and said, we are going to withhold this aid because I want an investigation into the Bidens, you're telling me that wouldn't be enough for you to get this guy out of office?
I'm telling you that it wouldn't be. I don't believe, first of all, that's going to be put forward exactly like that. But let's just assume for a minute the background of this is corruption. The Burisma was the most corrupt organization in Ukraine, which was a corrupt country, back in 2016, as well as continuing that way, as far as I know. The head guy, the oligarch who controls Burisma, still controls it, fled the country when the previous president of Ukraine left at the time they had their revolt and revolted against the Russians and all of that, which happened, which we know in history. But the fact is they've never been investigated. And Hunter Biden is serving on the board of that company, making a lot of money, much more than you or I ever would make. It just stinks. The whole thing smells. So even if the president said, hey, I want Hunter Biden and the Burisma investigated for corruption before I'm going to release money, it's consistent with the policies of this president, and I think what any president should do to look into corruption wherever it is.
Even if it's a political opponent.
Proportion because his father's the vice president of the United States.
And it's no guarantee.
Made it a big leap to say, well, what we're really looking for is a way to politically benefit the president. He may have some benefit from it, but it's a side benefit. As I said earlier, I believe every president dealing in foreign policy, many of them holding back foreign aid, would be subject to some political benefit and motive if that were the basis upon which you did it. Corrupt motives really should not be the basis upon which to remove a president from office, in my opinion.
Do you believe that this would be going on if the Democrats actually thought they had a competent candidate who had a chance to beat Trump?
Oh, well, I don't. No, I don't. I doubt that it would be. I think the book about corruption that's out right now about the Bidens and about others that is on the market. You can go buy it at the bookstore today. Is a well-researched book, but the media, the national main media like the New York Times, Washington Post, are not going to report on that. And the reason they're not going to report on it is they want to see. They think Biden is the only real hope they've got of beating Trump in the election. It's really this whole thing is about the election next fall. By the way,
right? What do you mean this whole thing? Okay, Mr. McCollum, with all due respect, when you say this whole thing is about the election, correct me if I'm wrong. I thought this whole thing was about whether the president committed a crime or not. And when the Republicans want to go up there and say this is all about what happened in 2016, last I checked, this is all about whether he committed a crime or not. And when I'm just, again, this is just respectfully, this is just my opinion. If John Bolton, a lifelong Republican, says that the president withheld aid, and the reason why he withheld that aid was because he wanted an investigation into one of his political rivals, I find that to be extremely troubling and serious. Now, I understand what you said about Burisma and the Bidens, but that's a separate issue. If you think that they committed crimes, and by the way, I haven't seen any evidence to support the fact that Joe Biden has committed a crime.
Yeah.
But hold on. But if
I don't either. I don't
okay,
see any evidence of that.
but if you think he did, then okay, fine, open up an investigation. But if Trump withheld aid for that specific reason, that's not troubling to you at all as a man of law?
Well, if there were actual bribery, if there were something that was there, I would consider that. But I don't think. First of all, we're making big adjustments here.
No, I don't think we are.
We're making assumptions.
Bolton just released an.
We're making assumptions that this is what would come forth if John Bolton, who's my friend, I've known John a long time, if that's what he says in his testimony. Now, I don't want to go into the assumption game. I, first of all, don't believe he's going to say that, but maybe he will. And if he does, I'm open, as I have been throughout the process, to reassess my position.
Okay.
But I don't believe he's going to say it. And secondly, I believe if you take this to the position of motives of the president to do something in foreign policy, you have to assume that the Republicans and the President Trump's lawyers are not going to get witnesses either. They're going to, if witnesses are given for John Bolton to come or somebody else to the Democrats,
right?
Surely the president's going to get to call them. One of them they're probably going to call is going to be Hunter Biden.
Absolutely.
One of them they're probably going to call is going to be the whistleblower. One of them they're probably going to be calling is the woman from the Democrat National Committee in 2016 who went over to the Ukrainian embassy and got support or sought support, and it was given for Mrs. Clinton in that election, which is what really irritated Trump.
Okay.
And we've never heard that whole story. They were never allowed to bring that forth to explain the motives and the background of the president in being so interested in corruption in Ukraine in particular.
I don't have
he's been down on Ukraine all along.
And Brian, one thing you're not thinking about here is the fact that, okay, let's say that John Bolton comes out and all the Republicans decide that he needs to be it's time for him to testify. Well, then Hunter Biden will come up to the stand 100%. I think that Bill's totally right in making that statement. And you're telling me that when he goes up on the stand, that his testimony is not going to basically indicate that it was reasonable and it was warranted for Donald Trump to be looking into Burisma and the Bidens and Joe Biden?
All right. Well, we'll ask Bill this question, Mr. McCollum. What bringing Hunter Biden up on the stand, in my personal opinion, it would be trying to smear the Bidens. So explain to me this then. What can Hunter Biden bring to the table that would help decide whether Donald Trump committed a crime or not? What can Hunter Biden bring to the table to help Donald Trump's defense? That's what I'm confused about. Maybe you could help me with that.
Well, I think he would have to explain why he, who knew nothing about that industry at all, why he was in the position with a very corrupt organization of taking all this money to be a board member for a number of years, and the circumstances in which he achieved that goal.
Well, we all know that.
I think it would all come out. Well, we don't all. The public doesn't know.
His
that.
father's
also don't know
Joe Biden.
Just how right, and just how corrupt. But how corrupt is Burisma? I mean, it's one thing for somebody to ride on his father's coattails to certain things, but to ride on his father's coattails to be associated in that fashion and get paid that kind of exorbitant amount of money by one of the most corrupt organizations in the world. It seems to me that the president would be negligent not to seek, before giving the aid to Ukraine, an investigation of Burisma and that connection. Biden happens to be the one person who could come forward and talk about it. There may be others that could come forth and talk about it. But I think that's what he was referring to when he said he wanted to do it for us, meaning the United States, asking the President Zelensky to investigate Burisma and the Bidens. And if you recall, there was never any connection in anything I've seen with what the president said to the idea that it was just to investigate Vice President Biden. That there's a code word, perhaps, the Bidens for all of this. But I could be wrong, but that's the way I viewed it all throughout this. But beyond that, even if it were all true, I'll go back to my statement before. When you start trying to remove from office a president on the basis of corrupt motives, not corruption itself, not a crime. You just jumped to an assumption there's some crime here. I don't believe that is going to come forward. I don't believe the elements of bribery have ever been here, no matter what, but we'll see. I just don't believe they're there. And so consequently, I think you've taken a step too far in terms of precedent for what is a high crime and misdemeanor. It's got to be really serious. It's got to be really grave. It's got to really threaten the country. And I just don't think that is what we've got here. And, I don't.
And part of the conversation with Zelensky, and this has not been discussed by definitely not any left-wing media outlets or really any politicians, is that Trump told Zelensky in that conversation that Germany had not been providing you aid. And Trump has been, since day one, very, very much about the United States not giving aid to the rest of the world when the rest of the world is not giving back. And I think that sticks with his narrative since he's been the president of the United States. Why is that not being discussed?
Well, it should be discussed. And again, it goes back to his motives. There really has not been a full airing of this because in the House, the Democrats did not allow but like one witness or two witnesses the most, and that was like Jonathan Turley on the academic question. But none of the witnesses they really wanted to call to show the president's motives and to show this whole history of 2016 and why he was so concerned about corruption in Ukraine have never been brought forward. So it's one reason I like to see witnesses.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. So are we led to believe, I would imagine this is your opinion, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, that the entire 100% reason why Donald Trump bought up the Bidens and that phone call with Zelensky was all of a sudden because he cares so much about corruption and had nothing to do with Joe Biden was most likely going to be his main political rival in 2020. Is that what we're supposed to be led to believe, that all of a sudden Donald Trump all of a sudden cares about corruption in the Ukraine?
No, I believe it's both things, though. I think it's a bit of both. I think he definitely cares about his political opponent. I think Trump, by nature, by temperament, by whatever, by his statements you see in reading the tweets, is an impulsive guy who doesn't think a lot about law and lines and bright whatevers unless somebody points them out to him.
Well, that's for sure.
And his political instinct will be to go after anybody who he goes after in whatever way. But let's look at it this way. We know that Giuliani was over-investigating this. He was looking into the
which is
Bidens.
ridiculous.
He was looking into the Burisma.
Which is ridiculous.
He was doing all of those things. And there's no question that he and the president, in my mind, had a conversation about all this more than once, and that he wasn't getting the cooperation he wanted, and he was hoping that the president would raise it so he could go further with his investigation of Burisma. Now, was it all about the Bidens? I don't think it was all about the Bidens. I think, knowing Giuliani, and I've known him for years, he's a guy who's Mr. Law and Order, Mr. Prosecutor. We don't see him coming forward because he's a president's lawyer, but in his history is to be a prosecutor and go after people who are doing real criminal behavior, and he could see that in Burisma, et cetera, and probably sensed as a prosecutor that maybe Hunter Biden, if not his dad, was involved in this in some way, and he was determined to go show whatever he'd found. Now, he made cahoots with a couple of people I wouldn't trust now. Big mistake on the Giuliani's part, but nonetheless, he believed that. And
so let me ask you this. As a lawman, Mr. McCollum, and as you said, former attorney general and congressman, don't you think it would have been more appropriate for the president to go through the DOJ and in these types of situations rather than get your personal attorney to go to the Ukraine to try to dig up dirt on the Bidens? Don't you find that to be, at the very least, troubling?
Well, first of all, I don't think any of this that he did, raising the Biden's name in the phone call or sending Rudy over to do some of this, was appropriate. Okay, that word I would agree with you on. Would I censure him for it? I might even censure him for it. Depends on how all this comes out in the next few days. Again, don't believe he should be removed from office. Don't think it rises to that level. But as far as whether or not I would have gone another route, every president, dating way back when, has had some emissary to go around the State Department, to go around the Justice Department or whatever, where he personally didn't have the same confidence in them he did in a particular individual as this president's got in Giuliani. So it's not unusual to do that. And with some good reason, historically, he didn't trust the establishment at the State Department.
So maybe I'm ignorant.
The Secretary of State.
Maybe I'm ignorant to this, and maybe you could educate me on this because I'm unaware of it. Can you name me a situation in 8 years where Barack Obama hired his personal attorney to try to dig up dirt on a Republican political opponent rather than going through the DOJ? Because I'm unaware of it.
Well, I don't know about digging up dirt on an opponent. I don't know about that. But as far as having an emissary go abroad for him, I can't name him off the top of my head, but I know I've read it and I'm familiar with it, that he has had and did use somebody to carry the message somewhere. And Obama himself is not free of this. Let's look at the fact that he had that opportunity with Medvedev to talk to him about the president then of Russia, about holding off until his reelection before they did anything or spoke up on missile defense. that was definitely a political play on his part to help him not have to face that issue or have something troubling come out of Russia during the middle of his election. So it was a foreign policy issue, but there was politics right there, and there was a motive, a political motive in dealing in foreign policy directly that we overheard the president say because the mic was live. So he's not free of this at all, and I don't think any president is.
Do you think that any Republican senators turn?
Well, I think the only turning here probably for a Republican senator is going to be on the question of witnesses, not on the ultimate question of whether the president should be removed from office. I have a very hard time believing they will be. Now, again, we're speculating on what Bolton might say. We're basing that speculation on a reported anonymous source of a manuscript that nobody's seen. The Times hasn't seen it. I haven't seen it. You haven't seen it. And Bolton is silent. So I think that based on something unusual that could come out, it could even turn me, I suppose. But I don't anticipate that, and I don't think we should at this point. I think that's highly improbable.
Well, fair enough. Let me just say, Mr. McCollum, I really do appreciate you stating your case and your side of this. And certainly as a former congressman and attorney general, you have a lot of experience. And we certainly do appreciate your opinion and you taking the time to come on the show. And we respect you as well for doing so. Thank you so much for taking some time to join us. Appreciate that very much.
You're welcome. Sure thing.
Thank you.
All
right. There you go. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Bill.
That is Bill McCollum, former Bill Clinton House impeachment manager, former congressman from Florida and attorney general. So certainly a lot of experience. But he stated my case for me, and he said he said there were two reasons why he brought up the Bidens. One, to fight corruption, which I would argue that, and then he said the other reason is because he cares about his political opponent. Well, guess what? You just made my point for me. When you bring something up because you care about your political opponent and you want to dig up dirt, and you allegedly withhold aid to try to dig up that dirt, that is a crime. And I'm telling you right now, Bolton, if he does testify, I hope he does. I personally believe 150% that is the case he's going to make. That is the evidence of a crime, and the Republicans are going to have egg on their face. Period.
Absolutely, they're not going to have egg on their face. That's not going to take place. And if
what's not going to take place?
But if Bolton testifies and he says, and Bill is very right. This is all 100% hearsay at this point. No one's seen anything. This is a potential.
So you think this is a lie about his book?
I'm not saying it's a lie. I'm saying no one has seen it yet. Have you seen it yet? Have
no.
I? Has the New York Times?
But
no one has seen it.
It's a hypothetical. I'm saying if he testifies and he testifies that there was a quid pro quo, that's a crime.
And if he testifies, and then Donald Trump will bring, and his attorneys will bring up Hunter Biden.
I don't care.
And Hunter Biden will get destroyed because he can't plead the
Nothing to do with whether he committed a crime or not.
Of course it is.
No, it doesn't.
He can't plead the fifth. There has not been a thorough investigation of this at any point.
There was an investigation.
Brian, all it will do is it will justify why Donald Trump was okay with wanting to look into Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, Burisma, and the Ukraine.
Okay, well, we got to take a break.
That's what will happen if he goes up on the stand. And by default, whether he wants to or not, it will absolutely smear Joe Biden.
All right, so we got to take a break. I think what we're forgetting here is whether there's no evidence to support the fact that the Bidens committed a crime, and even if there was, it still wouldn't be legal for Donald Trump to withhold aid from a foreign country because he wants an investigation into a political opponent. It's pretty cut and dry there. We're going to have to wait and see what happens with Bolton, but we'll take your phone calls on this. What do you make of this? This new revelation, John Bolton, according to the New York Times, suggesting that Bolton in his book is writing that there was a quid pro quo, that Donald Trump did withhold aid for personal gain, and he told Bolton that face-to-face. What do you make of that? Do you think this is a game changer? I certainly do. We'll take your phone calls, 702-257-5396. Again, that number to call, 257-5396. We will take your calls on the other side of the break. This is the Vegas Take.